sending 5 million barrels of oil, China getting 1 million barrels of our strategic petroleum reserve. Maria, this is dangerous. It's a national security issue. It would lead you to believe Hunter Biden is out here negotiating these deals because Unipec is tied to a company that Hunter is doing some business with. This is wrong. And people are fed up with this. It is a China first policy, not an America first policy. It has got to end.
And that was Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn on this program earlier in the month after news broke that the Biden administration sold oil from America's strategic reserves to foreign countries, including U.S. adversary China. It's one more reason for critics to pile on, questioning President Biden's agenda and why he appears so weak on China. Canceling the China initiative, considering lifting tariffs on Chinese imports, and continuing to push this climate change agenda, which in some cases once again benefits China, with so much of the agenda produced there, such as electric vehicles, batteries, solar panels. The agenda will not pass Congress as proposed, we're told. Joining me right now to assess the agenda and more is California Congressman Khanna. He sits on the House Oversight, Armed Services, and Agriculture Committees. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thanks very much for being here this morning.
Good morning, Maria. Always a pleasure.
So I know that there was a vote which you voted on the House motion to not sell oil from the U.S. strategic reserves. What happened?
Well, I don't think we should be selling oil to foreign countries right now. I have called for a ban on exports. That's a procedural vote. Democrats always vote against the motion to recommit. But in terms of policy, I have been very clear that we should not be exporting our oil at this point, other than to European allies.
So why did that sale take place then to foreign countries in addition to China, our adversary? How did that happen?
No, it's wrong. I mean, I have Senator Jack Reed and I early on said that we shouldn't be exporting our oil or gas. I don't think that was the right decision. And we're still calling on the president not to export it. In fact, one of the reasons to declare a climate emergency is it would actually give him the power to restrict the export of crude oil. That's one of the things that comes with it. But, Maria, the more important thing is how can we make things in America again and outcompete China? And that's been my focus in Congress.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that focus. The CHIPS Act is something that is very important, I think, for the country to understand. Producing very important items in America is critical. But you just mentioned this climate emergency, Congressman, and I've got to push back on the word emergency for climate. I think most Americans right now are feeling the emergency in their wallet. We look at the cost of items on everything from food to gasoline to the price of an airline ticket, and everything is up in the double digits. And it is partly because of the massive spending of this administration and the Democrats continuing to try to push through more spending, included higher taxes on top of higher borrowing costs and a 40-year high in inflation. What do you have to say about the failure of this agenda?
Well, I agree that there's inflation. I agree that prices are up, but there are two reasons for that. First, the Fed had quantitative easing for way too long, and that was one of the main primary culprits of this. They didn't anticipate the inflation. The monetary policy is largely determined by the Fed. And the second thing is we're not making enough things in America. I mean, look at the shipping costs. Look at the costs for importing all these goods. If we had an industrialization policy, if we made more things in America, we would lower costs. And I'd rather that we be making the solar panels, the electric vehicles, the wind turbines in America than China. Why would we want China to have the lead in batteries and the new energy of the 21st century? I want America to lead in that.
Yeah, I want to take a break and then talk about the CHIPS Act. But with all due respect, Congressman, we know that the inflation rate was at 1.4% when Joe Biden walked into the White House. And we know that then he signed the COVID relief package into law at almost $2 trillion. And that was the beginning of the stoking of inflation. We can talk about that after the break. I'm talking with Khanna this morning, California Congressman, as we await more economic data in the week ahead. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back, and we are back with California Congressman Khanna, who has been working on important legislation on the CHIPS Act. Congressman, I want to get to that in a moment, but we ended the last segment on the COVID-19 relief package, $1.9 trillion signed into law last March 2021. And that was the beginning of inflation getting stoked. You are now encouraging Biden to declare a climate emergency. Congressman, what would this do? Is now the right time to spend more money and raise taxes on people? The average electric vehicle costs $63,000. The median household income is $67,500, Congressman.
Maria, just to be factual on inflation, there was $3 trillion of spending under President Trump. And yes, there was spending under Joe Biden, but it is unfair to say that it's just the spending under Biden that somehow caused the inflation and not under Trump. They were both parties that were committed to helping people rescue them from COVID. But
Congressman, I'm just looking, just to be clear, Congressman, I'm looking specifically at the numbers. And when we look at the inflation timeline, which was the handover from President Trump to President Biden, this was in January of 2021, the consumer price index was at 1.4%. So when you say, there was spending under Trump, yes, that's right. But when you look at actual inflation, inflation was at 1.4%. Then it was 2.6% in March of 2021. Then the president signed in the COVID relief law. By the time we got to July of 2021, inflation was at 5.5%. Then the Democrats led the infrastructure package. That was signed into law November 21, and inflation was up to 6.8%. By March of 2022, right after the invasion by Russia, inflation was at 7.9%. And today, we are at 8.6%. From the last meeting, above 9%, rather, for the last reading in June, 9.1% is the last reading. So we're up to 9.1%, Congressman, with all of this spending.
But, Maria, correlation and causation are different. I mean, you can't say that Trump sending stimulus checks in December of 2020 was not inflationary and somehow Biden doing it in March was inflationary. What happened is we got out of COVID because of vaccines developed by President Trump and President Biden distributing them, and that increased demand, and the supply was constrained, and the Fed policy was wrong. But I agree with you that inflation is a major problem. The way to address it is to have more industrialization in America, to build more things in America, not to be relying overseas. And the climate emergency, look, if there were ever a time to go to the American people and say, we don't want petrostates like Russia to have power. We don't want our president to have to go to beg to Saudi Arabia for oil. We don't want to be going dependent on Iran or Venezuela. The way to do that is to have a moonshot on renewable energy and to make that stuff in America, not China. That's what a climate emergency would do. It would say, because of this war, let's have a long-term energy independence strategy and make the solar, the wind, the batteries here.
Oh, I think it is an emergency, but it's an emergency because we have completely iced out investing in fossil fuels. I mean, that's really where the emergency is. You go to any investment portfolio manager today, and they're being told, you better get on board with ESG or you're going to have major problems. You're not going to be investing in fossil fuels. So if you're talking about an emergency, why not reinstate the XL pipeline? Why not allow drilling on federal land right now, Congressman? Wouldn't that get gasoline prices lower rather than going hat in hand to Saudi Arabia?
What would get gasoline prices lower is stop exporting the oil while these oil companies are making billions of dollars. I mean, it's not like they're not making huge record profits, $30–40 billion of profits, while Americans are getting fleeced at the pump, and they're selling their oil overseas to make that profit.
It's not the oil company's fault, sir. This is capitalism. You're going to see companies make money for selling a product. That is democracy and capitalism. But the fact is there is a massive pushback against oil companies. The oil industry, how many companies have gone bankrupt? How many times have we seen investors want to invest in oil but told not to? And in fact, we're allowing investors to invest in Chinese stocks that don't even follow auditing rules, and they're tied to the Chinese Communist Party. So oil companies are bad, but investing in communist China is good?
I'm not for investing in communist China. I'm just saying that the oil companies are doing just fine. And you know that, Maria. Exxon, Chevron, they've got record profits.
I'm not talking about the oil companies. Just to be clear, I'm not talking about the oil companies, and I'm not talking about President Trump. talking about President Biden and the climate change agenda, which has, in fact, killed many in the oil industry. And as a result, we are seeing a freeze out of investing in fossil fuels. You have a very important idea about investing in this country and producing in this country with the CHIPS Act. But there are also pushback, Congressman, there as well, where people are saying there's too much focus just on chips and we need the money spread out. Tell me about the CHIPS Act and whether or not you're going to be able to get this to the finish line, because I agree with you. There is way too many critical items that American families need that are made in China right now. Why can't we fix this problem?
There we completely agree, Maria. Look, the last time we had a trade surplus in this country was 1975. It's crazy. We've outsourced our industrial base. We need to get it back. We should have a bipartisan goal to have a trade surplus in America again by the end of the decade. And this act is a step. It's a bipartisan act. It would make sure that semiconductors are made in America again, like the Ohio plants, bipartisan. Governor DeWine, Republican, deserves credit for that happening. It would make sure that we're investing in AI here, in quantum computing here, in electronics manufacturing here, in clean technology here. I am for the reindustrialization of America, and that is something that we should do when China has a Made in China 2025 initiative. And I'm not for removing these tariffs on China on the dumping into the United States. We need to have an industrial policy, both with the incentives and also stopping the Chinese dumping to rebuild our productive capacity.
It's a really important point that you make, Congressman. I don't understand why we are all not on board. I mean, during COVID, we saw how incredibly vulnerable this country was because the elements in prescription drugs were made in China. And the Chinese state global media, the Global Times, was threatening that they weren't going to send those prescription elements. So you're right on. We appreciate your leadership in this area, Congressman. Thanks very much for joining me this morning on this very important topic. All right, Khanna joining us this morning.